so now I want to move on to a different topic. And this is a topic that's very much near and dear to the hearts of all hospital administrators, all anesthesia departments, as well as my surgical colleagues. So let's talk about this ongoing issue with the anesthesia workforce. And the data that I'm going to present to you comes from Medicare and Medicaid data, as well as the U.S. Department of Labor and the Health Services Department of the U.S. government. All right, so in order to understand the problems with the anesthesia workforce, it's important to go back 30 years or so. And at that time, that was when managed care was starting to take a lot of effect within the US health system. And what happened was that there was a clamping down on surgical procedures, use of surgery by these large managed care organizations. And many anesthesiologists felt that the job market, and nurse anesthetists as well, felt that the job market was tightening. And at that point, the ASA hired an outside Washington consulting firm to look at projections of manpower for anesthesia and nurse anesthetists over the next several years as managed care started to be implemented across the United States. And what they came to the conclusion, and this is in 1994, was that we were training about 30% too many residents. And in the worst case scenario, we shouldn't train any anesthesiologists for the next 16 years, okay? And there were stories about anesthesiologists in New York City who were driving cabs because they couldn't find jobs. This was picked up by the Wall Street Journal. And once again, they ran headlines saying that this was once a favored specialty, but now no one can get jobs, so don't think about going into the specialty. Well, you can imagine what an effect this had. And we see this in the number of residency positions and the filling of residency positions. And just to show you here, this are many different specialties, but look at anesthesiology, starting from about 1990 until, the recovery rate was really slow, all until the year 2000. There was a huge dearth in terms of filling anesthesia positions. And as a matter of fact, at one point, it was less than 50% of all residency positions were being filled. Okay, so that's one aspect that you'll see has a huge effect in terms of the manpower going forward. The second thing is the epidemic. And you see here that during the epidemic from 20 to 21, there was a huge turnover in terms of healthcare personnel within hospitals. And just between 2020 and 2021, just as an example, nurse anesthetists, the turnover there increased from 8 to almost a quarter of all the employees at different hospitals. Another thing that affects the manpower. The next thing that occurred was increase in workforce departures, which occurred during the epidemic. And you can see here from this type of thing that not only was there a huge increase amongst both anesthesiologists and nurse anesthetists, up to about 600. This is quite a large increase from previous years. But not only that, but younger people started leaving the workforce as a result of the epidemic. This led to a drive up in labor costs, and many hospitals were forced to underwrite some of the salaries for anesthesia personnel just to get people in there and to recruit people. There's another thing that happened too, and that's that a lot of out of operating room procedures have become more and more sophisticated, requiring anesthesia support. So there was a growing need for anesthesia personnel. Okay, and this was reflected. Now, GasWorks is a national website where job postings are posted. And you can see that with this all of these types of factors that are contributing to the decrease in the workforce, you can see that the number of advertisements for open positions increased dramatically, and particularly following the epidemic. And this is just the nurse anesthetists in terms of anesthesiologists. And whereas around October 2018, the number of advertisements for open positions was similar between anesthesiologists and nurse anesthetists. It's actually climbed much more rapidly for nurse anesthetists. So there's a high need, or it's reflected in these job advertisements. And just to give you an idea of open positions nationally, on the GasWorks website for nurse anesthetists, it's approximately 2,200 open positions that are being advertised versus anesthesiologists, it's about 1,500. So the job market's actually, there's a very large need for anesthesia personnel. Okay, so that's on the one hand. What's the good news? The good news is that since that time, or over the last several years, there has been a larger production of anesthesia personnel and training of them. So you can see here with the nurse anesthetists, we've increased the number of people being trained, and now on average, in the last couple of years, we're training and graduating about 2,200 to 2,400 new nurse anesthetists per year. Similarly, anesthesia the anesthesiologists have recovered as well. As you can see, here's the dearth in the 1990s, and now they've increased the number of residency positions to approximately 2,100, and they're filling almost 100%. So there is help on the way, and you can see this in the numbers, and this is Medicare and Medicaid billing data, and you can see that the number of nurse anesthetists that are billing has gradually increased, whereas the number of anesthesiologists has remained relatively stable. And at this time, there's approximately almost 9,000 more nurse anesthetists nationally than there are anesthesiologists. Now, we'll talk a little bit about why this is flatter than the nurse anesthetists. Anyway, there's also another entity that's come into play, and that's these certified anesthesiology assistants. And their number has grown in recent years to over 44,000 practicing anesthesiologist assistants. So there are a lot more people being trained and coming out into the market, which should help this to increase the supply of anesthesia personnel. Okay, but it's important to keep in mind that decrease in residents that occurred in the 1990s. And what does that mean? It means that usually you like to see that you're training enough people to replace the people who are leaving the specialty. But because of this episode that occurred in the 1990s, it's going to take another 10 to 15 years until the number of residents that we're training actually exceeds the number of people who are leaving the specialty. And this is the reason why, when you saw that previous curve, the number of anesthesiologists practicing is remaining flat for the next probably 10 or 15 years. But it's a little different on the nurse anesthetist side, and that's that they have a much younger contingent. So the production of nurse anesthetists is ever increasing the number that are practicing. So you're seeing a flat curve with anesthesiologists for the next 10 or 15 years, but the supply of nurse anesthetists is going to continue to grow. What does this mean in terms of workforce projections? And this is kind of the bottom line where people can look at. Well, first of all, it's important to note that the scale of these two is different. Both of them, the US Department of Labor both predicts that the need over the next 10 years of both anesthesiologists and nurse anesthetists is going to be about 60,000 each. However, as I told you, there's going to be a difference in supply and demand that's being predicted. And that difference is reflected in what I just told you. Unfortunately, because of what happened in the 1990s, the supply of anesthesiologists is going to remain very flat. So it's predicted that even though the need is very high, up to 60,000, the supply is not going to be there for the next 10 or 15 years. However, with nurse anesthetists, because many of them are younger and the number is continually increasing, although the demand will increase to 60,000, there may be an oversupply over the next 10 or 15 years. And with that, I'm certainly open to any discussions, but this is what the projections are over the next 10 or 15 years by the U.S. Department of Labor. And I thank you very much for your attention.